Welcome to another episode of University and Everything in Between. As I'm about to show Pippa, we've gone a bit festive this week. On my left, Pippa, you might be able to see, I'm not sure if you can see it on the Zoom call, but on my left there's some festive Christmas trees. I'll grab one. Why not grab one? Look, I've got these put on the side, and on the right, which you might be able to see better, is a nutcracker. So,
he's snazzy.
Yeah, my mum was very proud of those. And on the mic arm, we've got some lights. I'm not sure if you can see those.
They are very jazzy. I'm a fan of the fairy lights.
Yeah, the production budgets are going up and up and up every episode. But how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to chatting. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. But I have to say, you're probably one of the most impressive guests that I've had on. You sent me a lovely email just before we've gone to record this, and I've added all the additions, but I found it very funny that you were almost talking down the fact that you didn't have more than one book published. And I was like, that's more than I've got. That's more than a lot of people have got.
One day I will have more than one book published, but I feel like, I don't know, I always do this. Whenever I do anything like this, I just inherently kind of feel like I need to play it down and manage people's expectations. I have no idea why, but it's just a thing. Oh, you've really got to big yourself up. That's something that, that I think we've got to spread that message a bit more. But yeah, you're a blogger, you're a writer, you've got a book published and 2 ebooks that are on your website, which are fascinating, all about, your experience at university with with an invisible illness, and, how to study in lockdown as well, which we're going to touch on a little bit. And obviously raising awareness for what you've been going through and what your life is like, and it's fascinating to read, and I enjoyed reading some of the stuff that's online. And you just provide advice and tips to students and young people, and I think that was one of the main reasons why I got in touch with you, because you're a very interesting person, and I think you've got a lot to share with the world beyond just what you write on the page, even if it is very fascinating to read. Can you just quickly break down what your illness is and what you experience day to day? So my illness is ME, which stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis, bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
It's sometimes known as chronic fatigue syndrome, but a lot of people with the condition don't like that name because it trivializes it to an extent. ME is a neurological condition. It affects people in very different ways, but some of the characteristic symptoms are things like debilitating fatigue, chronic pain, cognitive difficulties, so things like brain fog and short-term memory loss. There's something called post-exertional malaise, which is where you do an activity at one time and you don't feel the kind of payback or impact of that until a much later time. Noise and light sensitivity, like allergies and chemical sensitivities, just a whole host of really fun symptoms like that.
Yeah.
I think that's basically all you need to know. There isn't a cure for the condition at the minute, and there isn't targeted treatment. There isn't a great deal of research going on at the minute, so people tend to manage their symptoms through activity management and something called pacing, which is the concept of resting before you get tired, which as a student that just completely goes out of the window, to be honest. It's much easier said than done. Mm-hmm. And yes, that's ME in a nutshell.
Apologies if you've been asked that many times. I imagine you've been asked that question many times. I know you've been on I know you've been on radio shows and local news broadcasters and stuff like that, but just for context, it's helpful.
No, I've got much better at slimming down my definition of it. Over the years, there was a time where I just did not know where to start with it. But
yeah, you'll be making a presenter of yourself yet. You never know.
I can dream.
But just to give you the quick opportunity, if there's anything you want to shout out that you're doing, that you've done in the last few weeks or months, or anything that's coming up, 30 seconds, the stage is yours. I like to do this with some of the guests. Just tell people what's going on. What should people be checking out, whether it's a new book or ebook? What's going on?
Okay, elevator pitch. Okay, I can do this. So yeah, in a nutshell, like you said, I'm a writer and a blogger. My blog is at Life of Pippa. I do a lot of stuff on Instagram, which is also Life of Pippa. I'm not working on anything major at the moment, but I've been doing a lot of things in the charity sector. So I work for a small charity called Astrid, which is an online platform that matches talented chronically ill people with inclusive employment opportunities. We're coming to the end of the year now, so I've kind of been winding down. But yeah, just starting to turn my thoughts towards 2021 and whatever the heck that year is going to bring. Because I think what we've all seen this year is that anything can happen.
Anything. I'm not even sure if I'm ready to start thinking about it yet. I'm trying to just looking forward to Christmas, and then we'll see what happens after that.
One day at a time. We'll do Christmas and then we'll deal with whatever comes next.
Exactly. But you, obviously, as you say, you're doing a lot of interesting things since you've graduated. And a lot of what this is going to focus on is back, sort of casting your mind back if you can. I imagine it's quite a while. How long has it been since you've graduated?
Oh, goodness. I graduated in 2016 and it honestly feels like another lifetime ago. It's absolutely bizarre. It's like 4 years isn't that long of a time, but it honestly seems like it feels like it was a decade ago. And yet at the same time, it also feels like yesterday. It's so strange.
Yeah, I imagine that a lot of people are going to go through that experience when they graduate. And I'm interested to find out anything that you've got to say about graduate life, and we're going to get to that in a bit. It's put the fear of God in me, maybe, or maybe put my hopes up, who knows. But just to sort of kick it off, which university did you go to?
So I went to the Uni of York. I started in 2013. Yeah, best uni. Not that we're biased at all, but you know.
Not all.
Started in 2013. I studied psychology in education, and like I said, graduated in 2016.
God, Uni of York's a great one, isn't it? I'm in my final year there, so it's exciting to talk to another person who's from the Uni of York. I don't know if you've kept up. I don't know if you've kept up with any of the sort of influencers. I say that in inverted commas that have come out of Uni of York, but I've spoke to Jay Foreman, who's a pretty big YouTuber. Student vlogs. Who's called Dylan. Rhiannon. Faye, there's loads of people that I spoke to from Uni of York, so it's great to add like another one to the roster, as it were. But overall, as you're sort of now going to be thinking about back at university again, how do you look back on those years? Is it with a relative fondness, or when you talk about how it's been so long, those 4 years, that you feel like it's kind of almost another time, it's a completely separate part of your life now. How do you look back on it?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it does almost feel like a separate part of your life because, as I'm sure you know, when you're a student, you do kind of live in that uni bubble. Like, it's almost as if the world outside fails to exist sometimes. You're very much caught up in the here and now. But generally speaking, like during my student experience, there were ups and downs. But when I look back, I do look back fondly. Like, I absolutely loved my uni years. I think my student years were some of the best of my life. And when I do look back, it's always with a kind of, oh goodness, like I simultaneously wish that I was back and then simultaneously feel really relieved that I don't have to do it all again.
There are some elements that you don't miss, let's be honest.
No, definitely
like living in shared student houses is fun for a bit, but you have to move on. You've just got to.
Yeah, oh my goodness, there are so many like invisible challenges with but it's exactly the same. Like when I'm sat here now in my flat and it's clean and it's nice and quiet, I can say, oh, I really miss student accommodation. I really miss being in those like flats with like the dingy curtains and the tiny bathrooms. But if I were to go back, maybe I'd like it for about a week and then I'd be like, okay, no, I'm over this.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you think about in terms of nostalgia, and then you actually go back and it's not as good as you remember. And I can tell you one thing for sure, you would not be able to have that amazing colour coordinated bookcase back in a shared student house, I could tell you that. Oh,
well, that's the deal breaker then. I mean, if this bookcase can't come with me wherever I go next, then I'm not going. Like, it's honestly, it brings me too much joy.
I can tell. Is that like a lockdown project or something that you've done, or just your personality?
And it's just my personality. It's very concerning. Like, I've always been like this. As soon as I got my own place, I was like, well, obviously the priority is going to be rainbow bookshelves. Yes. Like, I'm a big reader. And honestly, like, because I'm not well a lot of the time, I end up flat out on the sofa. So just being able to look at the glorious books and feel like I've got my life in like some sort of shape and order, it works.
Makes you feel a little bit better for like a short period of time looking at it. Yeah, I can imagine. Sure. But now, obviously, as you say, you've graduated for 4 years. You've got your own flat. What is the world like after graduating? I mean, for you, it's quite different because you've had lots of different opportunities, and you've done lots of different things, and you're working with charities. But on the whole, if you could sort of like maybe sum up your experience or what people maybe have to expect when they graduate.
I think the thing is, when you're in your final years of uni, I think everyone has a very set idea of what graduate life is going to look like. And in many cases, that's a very typical sort of non-pandemic times I'm talking about here, but like people think they're going to be securing like a graduate role, they're going to be working in an office 9 till 5. They sort of think that is like the general structure their life is going to take. Whereas now, like the employment sector is changing so much. And like, I think one of the positives that has come out of the whole pandemic situation is that people are realizing that the path into graduate life and the path into your career doesn't have to be as set as people seem to think it is. And that's definitely something that rung true for me. So even though I obviously had like a very unique situation where I was dealing with like a fluctuating illness as well, like it's really opened my eyes as to how many different ways there are to get into the sort of field that you want to get into. So like, my advice would probably be like, it's good to have expectations, but don't feel like you're stuck with those expectations because you just never know what's going to happen. So don't be afraid to do things a little bit differently. Yeah.
I think there's generally a lot of worry, at least what I've seen in like current third years in terms of the job market and the world that they're going into at the minute. Do you think there's some level of comfort in the fact that many students are entering into the same environment, whether it means that they can now have access to a lot of the same opportunities because a lot of stuff's moving online in terms of interviews and, you know, working from home a bit more, and, you know, there's less of a stress of having to commute or maybe make a big move to somewhere, you know, like a big city. Do you think it's almost leveled the playing field a bit more, or do you think it's maybe limited some of opportunities that have otherwise usually been around?
I think it's definitely leveled the playing field, like in so many ways. Working from home and having the flexibility on the part of employers has actually inadvertently removed a lot of the barriers that people can face. So when I graduated back then, all those years ago, even though it wasn't that many years ago, I'm not that old yet. One of the biggest struggles I had was finding a job where I could work from home, because that was something that I needed for my health condition. And it was so difficult to trawl through all the job sites and just trying to find opportunities where you could work from home. And it got to a point where like I wasn't even pursuing jobs that I was particularly interested in or that they were in the sector that I wanted to go into. I was just trying to find work from home. So fast forward to now, even if this situation isn't forever, and even if the work from home situation isn't forever, just people having that way in and having that barrier removed, I think that could have a really positive impact on a lot of people.
Yeah. I think choosing to be a writer as well is a great way of working from home.
I've essentially tried to shape my career where I can like plan my working day around watching This Morning and like staying in my pajamas, like taking breaks whenever I want. I had it all sussed out right from the beginning. Did you see
the pantomime? I think it was on This Morning that they did. Is that what?
Stop watching it. It was I so badly wanted to be like, oh, this is so great and so festive, but like I actually had to stop watching it because it was making me feel a bit ragey.
Oh dear. I thought it was a bit of fun, but but anyway.
I do like Alison Hammond as a fairy. I can get on board with that.
Okay, yeah, we can get on board with at least a little bit of that experience. But yeah, sort of now circling back to talk about the university experience. I thought that my start to university was quite challenging, right? Sort of, you know, that imposter syndrome, the, you know, anxiety, that, you know, worries about making friends and things like that. But honestly, I'd say that you probably take the cake. And this is not a competition at all. But in terms of, from reading your blog, you know, you talked about not being able to leave your flat or your house, pretty much teaching the degree to yourself, barely going out, barely having time to go outside and, you know, interact with people in that way. And when I was sort of researching you and reading about that stuff that you'd experienced at university, and we spoke about this in the pre-interview, and it was almost like the light bulb went off, and it was like, there is such a similarity between that experience that you had all those years ago, when everyone else was just going through university very, very normally, in inverted commas. And there's such a similarity to the way students are experiencing that now. And I hear about it all the time, and I've personally experienced it this last term, just basically doing my degree in my bedroom, in my house in third year. And it's just not the same at all. How do you see that experience that students are currently going through now compared to how you had to do it? And what advice do you have particularly?
Yeah, it's such a tricky one, and I really feel for the students who are in that kind of environment now, because like you spend all your final years of school thinking about university and all the fun experiences you're going to have. And you have like, generally speaking, you have like set ideas of what your uni life is going to look like. And I don't think anybody on the planet would have imagined that their uni life would look like this.
No.
I would be inclined to say that there must be like a little bit of comfort and solidarity for the people who are going through it now, knowing that everybody else is in the same boat. Not that it makes it any easier, but one of the distinct things I remember from my own experience, because of the fact that everyone around me was having that typical student experience, and that experience that I had enjoyed myself before my health really declined. I did find that quite isolating, and I did very much feel like I was alone, because I was stuck in my bedroom feeling like I was actually about to drop dead sometimes, to be honest, while I was seeing all my friends going out and doing all of these really fun things. Even on social media, you couldn't get away from it because everyone was like posting all their highlights. You know how it is. But yeah, there are so many similarities between what I went through back then, where I was very much I felt very much on my own with it. And I was like teaching my degree to myself because my uni wouldn't make reasonable adjustments. And yeah, what people are going through now, where they're having this experience. But I think something that is a constant for myself back then and what people are going through now is that at the end of the day, you do just have to make the best of it. And it's so much easier said than done, and it's miserable and nobody wants to be doing it. But this is the student experience that we've got, and we've just got to try and do what we can with it and just try and make the most of it, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, and it's a tricky one to even attempt to figure out what to do. It's like, I know some people who've seriously regretted choosing to come to university this year, in first year, and like people in third year who are, you know, struggling to motivate themselves to finish assessments and, you know, actually connect with their degree, and then people who graduated last year who were pretty much at the beginning of that sort of when the pandemic hit, and who missed their graduation entirely and it was online. And like, I can't imagine what that must have been like. Such an anticlimax to the end of a degree, to have to do an online graduation.
Yeah, I don't envy people having to do an online graduation. Like, those things are long ceremonies, even in person. So like an online one must be a whole new realm of torture.
Yeah, and I actually managed to get a sneak preview of what it looked like, and it was literally just a PowerPoint where they scrolled the names up like the credits at the end of a movie.
Absolutely not. No, thank you. It's a no from me.
It's literally like university end credits, like the title rolls. Like that's such a weird experience to have for the end of your university degree. It's mad.
I hope they played It's the Final Countdown in the background. If not, that was a real missed opportunity.
Obviously, you wrote an entire sort of ebook about current sort of activities in terms of studying in lockdown and motivating tips and advice. What are some like good bits that you'd say that people should bear in mind when trying to teach themselves a degree, bearing in mind you had to do almost the same thing 4 years ago?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would say is that when you're sitting down and you're thinking, I've got all of this content ahead of me and I've somehow got to take all of this in and I'm doing it very much alone, it can feel really overwhelming. So I would kind of really take some time to look at the course as a whole and then start breaking things down in a way that makes sense to you, whether that's by modules or whether that's by how much you feel you can realistically study in a day. And even if you feel like you're not doing as much as you think you're supposed to be doing or what you think everybody else is doing, which in itself, like, comparison is such an evil thing in lockdown, but just like breaking it down as much as you can. And even if you feel like you're taking baby steps, like doing those baby steps is better than doing nothing at all. And I do think that when you break things down rather than trying to like bulldoze through the whole thing, I think it's easier to find and keep motivation. Because like you get this like feeling of like ticking things off one thing at a time. And I do think, like, again, it's a really tricky situation and it's really difficult to offer concrete advice. But like, I would just say focus on you, find ways of studying and breaking things down that work for you, and just you do you. It doesn't matter what everyone else around you is doing. Like, you do you.
It's so hard to focus on your own sort of progress, isn't it, when you're getting inundated by everyone else's progress? And I've spoken to people on the podcast before about feeling self-worth when you see so much of things on social media And I'm sure this was an experience that you had, as you mentioned, when you were at uni, and you felt like you were missing out on that experience so much. And then the fact that social media has such a almost power over your perception of the rest of sort of uni, the rest of the world, the rest of people's social lives, and how much that can impact as well. And it's worrying for sure. It's worrying for sure, especially when, you know, younger people and people who be coming to uni in future years rely so much more on social media. And I just wondered, when you were going through that period, whether it was the worst in first year, second year, whatever, whether it got better, was it things like family and friends connections that helped you personally get through that, or was it something else that was it societies? What was going on?
In a big way, it was my university friends and my housemates. Like, we had a really solid friendship group. They're still some of my favorite people who I still see as much as I can. And like, even just chatting absolute rubbish with them, like it really did keep my spirits up. And like, to give credit to them, during my uni years, I was at a point where I was still very much in denial that I was ill. And the fact that I wasn't actually really communicating with them, and they didn't really fully understand what I was going through, despite that, I could tell they were still doing what they could to make sure that I still felt included.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, so I had my uni friends in real life, but it was also around this time that I first discovered the chronic illness community online. And that has completely transformed my life for the better, because for the first time, I was using social media and I was actually seeing other people like me and people who I could very much relate to. So it started balancing out like the highlights reels that I was seeing elsewhere. And it did kind of show like I'm not alone in this, even though it feels like there were so many times where I felt like I was completely alone and nobody in the universe could possibly understand. When in reality, there were all these people out there who were documenting their own experiences. And in doing that, they were showing me that I wasn't alone and there was a community who understood.
Yeah. Has that made you realize that how important it is to share your story almost? Because I think that was something that you weren't, it sort of relates back to how you were saying that you don't back yourself when you've got a book published, but it's like, do you almost now realize how important it is to share these kinds of stories, and also sort of mirrors what I'd originally hoped this podcast to be? And I feel like it's getting there. It's not 100% there yet, obviously. Nothing's perfect, nothing's complete. But do you understand like the importance of sharing stories and how you've probably impacted a lot of people since you've discovered this community and started writing about your experience?
It was like, it's a funny one because it's never something I set out to do. Like, it was after finding the online chronic illness community that I did feel like a slight pull to start documenting my own experiences. I never really set out to kind of like raise awareness or like all of that jazz, but like the more my audience grew and the more I connected with other people, the more important I realized it was to be authentic and have integrity. And I do feel like that sometimes is lost in the influencer community, speaking very generally, of course. And even now I get messages from people saying, oh, how do you have it so together? And it's like, when I get that like I feel like compelled to share, like I feel like I need to make more of an effort even now to show the realities and show that I don't always get it right. There are times where I'm absolute trash as a human being, to be honest. So it's a really difficult one, like, because at the same time, I want to show that it is possible to have a full and happy and positive life, even with a really debilitating health condition, which makes life more difficult. And like, people have been so kind to me and so lovely, and like, even I do feel guilty sometimes because I never set out to kind of like help people or raise awareness. It was very much like a self-indulgent thing, and it was almost like therapy for me. But it was actually just a couple of weeks ago I got the message that like it just meant more to me. Like, people have been so kind, but the one that really stuck with me was somebody saying, like, you showed me that it is possible to have a life that you love and a life you enjoy, and you can still achieve your goals even when you're dealing with something like this. And that just meant everything, to be honest. That was the best thing.
Yeah. It was something that I mentioned to you before as well. It's like the disability paradox, where people believe that you can't have a fun and enjoyable life if you have such an almost debilitating disability or illness. And I'm glad that that's something that you've eventually realised. And I have a good friend called Darcy who I brought onto this podcast, and we made a short film together. And she's, completely wheelchair bound, and, she interacts with the world in a different way. And people I've noticed, and I mentioned to you this before, people I've noticed react to her in very different ways. And it's interesting to see how, even though she's one of the most, like, she loves life so much, and she's one of the most energetic and fun people, but, you know, some people don't have time for her, or, you know, sometimes treat her with almost too much sympathy, to the point where it becomes like, I don't want to be negative and say like it's patronizing, but it's almost like you can tell she gets it, and she just wants you to move on and just, you know, get to the point, and you know, stop treating her like something's massively different when it's technically not really.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a really tricky line to balance. And again, there's such variability within disability in different conditions. And even within the same condition, like no two people's lived experiences are the same. So like my condition is a chronic illness called ME, which stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. Bit of a mouthful.
You can say that again, yeah.
I can't say that after having a few shots in the evening.
No.
And like, yeah, it's really tricky, especially being online and being in the line of work that I do. Like, you want to communicate that this illness, like, there is so much stigma around this illness, and it is so, like, it's horrible to live with, to be honest, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And like, we do need support and adjustments, like in both the medical sense and the societal sense. We should have access to that kind of support, but at the same time, like you said, we don't want to be patronized. We don't want to be viewed as any less. We just want to be on an equal playing field with everybody else at the end of the day. And like with your friend Darcy, I get people, even if I'm not talking about my disability, I'll be doing something online and I'll get people saying like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. And it's like, no,
it's like,
don't.
Why?
I like my life.
Yeah.
Like, don't feel sorry for me.
Exactly. God. You don't want people to be, yeah, as you say, you don't want people to be over sympathetic. It just becomes borderline annoying at that point.
Yeah.
But
pat the nice little disabled person on the head. That's what it feels like sometimes.
I mean, yeah, you know it more than anyone. But circling back again to university, and this was something that you were like, I'm probably going to give you a controversial answer to this question, but I'm all here for it. I don't want it to be, you know, cookie cutter. I want honest answers. But how important was it for you to complete university, going through that period? When you set out to go to university, obviously a lot of people have that expectation, that goal, that like set thing, and university can be a big stepping stone, and completing it can mean a lot. What was the case for you?
Again, it varies so much for disabled students, and the fact that there are so many barriers that people face, I think it's like, it should never be seen as a failure to have to drop out of uni or take time out or not finish your degree. And I mean, that goes for everybody, not just disabled students, because there can be so many different factors at play. I felt like with the right support and adjustments, I felt like I was capable of finishing my degree. So that was something that I was striving for. And there were times where I did think it wasn't going to happen. There were even times where I would ask university disability services for reasonable adjustments, and they would say, we can't do that, but if you're struggling that much, you should just have a year out instead. Which was a bit like, oh, wow, okay. So it was definitely challenging, but it did feel reasonable to kind of strive for that, I suppose. But then in the same breath, like, I would never want a disabled or chronically ill student to feel like finishing their degree and graduating is the ultimate end goal, because there are so many barriers and so many individual challenges in that space of time, that there are so many things within that. You can learn so much from uni, and you can achieve so much even without getting to the graduation stage.
Yeah. I'm 100% an advocate of, you know, using university as a jumping off point for more than just your degree, way more than just your degree. But were there any moments where you thought, obviously when the university was like, if you're really struggling, we'll give you a deferment, you know, take a year out, whether that actually helps or not? If you'd have taken a year out, may you have actually just gone, you know what, I'm pursuing this thing, maybe university's not that actually important, and maybe that's it, and just move on. But were there any moments, obviously because you wanted to finish university and you felt like you could, were there any moments though that you thought that it wasn't going to happen and you were just like, this is it, this is the last straw?
Funnily enough, it was that exact experience where I was like, what am I even doing here? Because like when they again, it kind of reflects what's happening at the minute with the pandemic, because I very much took things into my own hands and I did things by myself. The only thing I asked of my university was whether lectures could be recorded so that I could watch them back, because I wasn't physically well enough to leave my house and get to the lectures. So when they turned around and said, no, we can't and we won't do that, if you're struggling that much, then you should just have a year out instead. And it was very much said in a way where it wasn't like that was something they were suggesting to accommodate. They were suggesting it as if to say, like, you're not welcome here. And that was coming from disability services.
Oh my.
Yeah, it was bad. And like, knowing what I know now from other disabled students, like, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. Like, some of the things disabled students have heard is absolutely appalling. It's bizarre. So that was very much a moment like, well, if that's the one thing I asked and they're not willing to accommodate that, then what am I even doing? Can I even do this? And in a way, it did kind of almost feel like a little victory when I then did go on to graduate and get a 2-1 and get a degree I was happy with. It was like, well, but that was the thing. Like, they weren't willing to record lectures then because it was too much work for them. But then suddenly the pandemic happened and almost overnight, everything was recorded and went online. So
it's standard practice now.
Exactly. It was very interesting how, like, these things weren't possible until non-disabled students needed them too. It was very telling, I thought. But I'm really trying not to be bitter about it, because I'm glad that students now do have access to a bit more support in that way.
That's fascinating. I didn't think about it like that until you mentioned it. That's mad. And it's shocking.
It's a whole thing.
It's shocking as well that that's the University of York, because I've spoken to a few people who've gone through different experiences as in terms of, you know, Black Lives Matter as well and things like that, and different and as well sexual assault at the uni hasn't been dealt with great in the past, and so many different experiences that kind of surprise you for a university that you think is pretty inclusive and pretty, you know, progressive with dealing with these sorts of issues. But yeah, it's kind of shocking.
Yeah, it's I mean, like, I'd be keen not to tarnish them with, like, in a totally negative way, because there were some people there, like my personal supervisor in my department, who really fought my corner. She was a brilliant ally. She really went out of her way to make sure that things were as okay as they can be. So whilst there are some people there who I did feel like went above and beyond, like, I definitely think, not just in terms of disability, but all the issues you've mentioned there as well, like, there is definitely work to be done. And in student culture as well, not even just confined to specific unis. I feel like things are improving, but there's a long way to go in terms of diversity and equality for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. But obviously all of these issues stem from the fact that throughout your uni and throughout your life, you've been having to deal with this invisible illness. And at university, you made the decision to, on the whole, not really tell many people about it that you were friends with. What was the decision for that? Because in my mind, it's helped me more, and I'm sure you do it more now as well, it's helped me more to share that experience more and tell people about it. And I feel like hiding a big part of your life whilst at university from people who maybe, you know, they probably couldn't do a whole lot, but, you know, sharing that issue or that worry might have helped a little bit in terms of, you know, them making you feel more included or put at ease a little bit more. What was the main reasons that you decided not to?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I would encourage anyone who's listening to this, anyone who's dealing with an issue, like, please don't bottle it up. Like, please communicate as best as you can, because I wholeheartedly realize now that is the best way to go about it. The issue I had back then was, I was like, to cut a very long story short, I'd been mildly ill with my condition for years and years since I was a teenager, but it only really got bad halfway through my degree. So I went away summer of first year completely, like, fine, in inverted commas, came back in second year basically in a completely different situation, whilst also still having an invisible illness. So people couldn't tell just from looking at me what I was going through. And for probably a good chunk of second year, I was very much in denial about what I was going through. I was like, I had this really toxic mindset that I think we all pick up from the media about disability. And it's all that kind of like, oh, you can do anything if you put your mind to it. If you really try, you know, you can do anything. So I was kind of in denial about the whole thing, and I was adamant that I could just continue on the way I had been. So I thought, in part, by not telling the people around me that anything had changed, I could pretend that nothing had changed.
Right.
So like course mates and stuff, like my housemates had a better idea of what was going on because I couldn't really hide it from them. But yeah, course mates, it was it was a decision to not tell them. But looking back now, whilst like you say there might not have been a great deal that they could realistically do, I don't think I would have needed to have worried so much about like stigma and them not understanding. I think they might have kind of heard it a bit better, if that's the right word. But like, yeah, I don't know, I feel like it would have not been as big of a deal as I'd built it up in my mind to be.
I think these things tend to get built up in your mind, and you tend to like overthink it. Do you regret almost in that way for not telling more people, or is it just kind of like it happened, you move on?
A bit of both really, because I think after that point I did start isolating myself from other friendship groups who I'd made, like people on my course, people in societies. I did massively take a step back. Whereas if I perhaps had the confidence to be a bit more open about it, I perhaps could have held on to some of those things. But yeah, like it was very much a learning curve. And now, I mean, obviously in my line of work, like I'm very much open about my situation. Like everybody knows
Absolutely, yeah.
a lot of stuff about me and my health. So it isn't a case where I'm actively having to go out and disclose it as often now. So yeah, it's something that I've learned from. And like, if I were in that kind of situation in the future, I would probably feel a lot more confident in just coming up to people and saying, I have this, it means I struggle to do this, this, and this. And you can help by being or doing this, this, and this. And like, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal.
We're about to get on to your graduation very, very soon. Because obviously that was what eventually you managed to get through and do, and hopefully I will do the same. Who knows? We don't know what's going on nowadays. But I wondered if you had any sort of almost like a game, but not a game, like a best and worst. We do this thing in University Radio York when every time we change position, we do like a best, worst, and funniest, and then we step down. So I wondered, I can set you off with one of my own to give you time to think if you need it. But this year specifically, we did this thing called Student Radio Awards, and every year you submit like a 5-minute demo, basically what I'm doing now. It's just 5 minutes of like you're presenting, your best presenting, and you hope to God that you win an award for it. And this year I got shortlisted but didn't win the Best Music Presenter Award. And honestly, it was the wildest experience of my life. They had tons of people from Radio 1 and Global and loads of the other like big radio stations around the country, like presenting these awards. And it was just the maddest thing seeing my name on this little like thing saying I'd been nominated, and I was like, oh my God. I didn't win, but next year I'm gonna win. We're gonna do it.
You are. I can tell. I mean, I'm always right, and I think you're gonna win. So you're sorted.
But it's completely different presenting to what I'm doing here. But it's a lot of fun. But
that's amazing.
We'll do some best, worst, and funniest if you can think of one. What's a best moment that you recall from university?
I might have to save that for funniest. My best and my funniest are very similar.
Okay.
Best. I don't know, maybe it was just realizing that I'd got to the end of my degree. And again, not to play into that like inspirational stereotype because I really don't like it, but like just kind of thinking, well, there were all these barriers. People thought I couldn't and shouldn't be doing it, but I kind of did it and I did all right. And just like, there was about a week after I finished my final lectures, I do remember a moment where I was going about my day doing something else, and it just kind of hit me that, oh my gosh, I actually did that.
Yeah.
And that's something I still hear, because I was listening to music at the time, and whenever I hear that song now, I think, oh my gosh, it takes me right back to that moment. Mm-hmm. So that's probably my best, even though strictly speaking, that's a little bit after.
One of my worst / funniest, I'll combine it and then try and think of another funny one. But there was a 6-pint bottle of milk in my fridge that had gone off, and I don't know why I decided to do this. But instead of just tipping it down the sink like a normal person, I'm fully outing myself here, by the way, so any people from the C2 block flat in Constantine will know about this. Instead of just tipping it down the sink like a normal person, I decided to pour it out of the window 3 floors up. And basically what happened was there's ledges outside of a lot of these blocks, like steel bar ledges that go around the building. And it was just smacking this ledge and like spraying all over the windows on the flats below. And
that's grim.
Yeah, this was 2 years ago when I was in first year. And within 5 minutes, the entire block group chat was going off because people were freaking out about what was coming down the window. And literally for the entire day and the week after, that was all people could talk about. I was so embarrassed because multiple people started this like cleaning project where they had to clean all the windows. I felt so bad because I didn't say a word and these people had to clean all of these windows, and I was so embarrassed, and my entire flat were pissing themselves at me. Someone from the flat below, this 6'5", like big huge dude, came upstairs to our flat, walked into our kitchen, and literally I was sat in there moments after doing it, and there was a few other people who'd saw me do it, and he was like, wasn't even messing around. He was like, have you just poured something out of our window? And literally, I was like so scared. I just literally went like, no, that must have been upstairs. It wasn't us. And credit to my flatmates, they backed me up.
Oh my gosh. I bet your life flashed before your eyes at that moment.
Yeah, I was sweating. I was absolutely sweating. And it was a terrifying moment, and I was so embarrassed about it and regretted it quite a lot, because it was just one of those stupid things that I just did in the moment and didn't think about whatsoever. And since then, strive to be a better person.
You got it out of your system during your student years. At least you didn't do that in your graduate job. That would have been a different story. You've got it out of your system now. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been an awkward one to explain. But if you want to combine your worst and funniest, you're welcome to, or separate them out. But what's a worst or funniest from you?
Oh, they're nowhere near as scandalous as your milk situation. Honestly, worst was probably just when I'd been drinking, and this is a very student typical story. We'd all been drinking. It was like 3 a.m. I'd gone to bed, but my flatmates were playing tennis with a toaster, with a kitchen toaster outside of my flat, like you do. And I was very much attached to that toaster. I'm a very much a toast person. And I think I just had too much to drink, and I just started crying because I felt bad for the toaster. I think I was just overtired, but that was, really difficult. I really had to soldier on to, cope with that hardship that I felt on behalf of the toaster. But but that my funniest, it was a really low-key thing, and I think I said this earlier, but some of my absolute highlights from uni weren't like the mad nights out or all of the big things. It was very much just being in the house with my housemates and having chilled evenings in.
Yeah.
And like the one that always sticks in my mind is my housemate and I feeling a bit bored, a bit fed up in the evening, and just deciding that we were going to throw a birthday party, despite the fact it was no one's birthday. So we went to Co-op. We got decorations. We decorated the living room. We bought ourselves an entire Co-op birthday cake each, and we just had a really lovely evening of it. It was great.
An entire cake each.
An entire cake each. Oh, Co-op cakes though, they're like god tier cakes. They're the best cakes. So if anyone is going to throw an impromptu birthday party, highly recommend Co-op's cakes.
I'll have to check that out. Maybe see if I can bring something to the house the next term. Oh dear. But obviously now we're going to go on to graduation. That's going to come in later in the year for me next year. And you made it and you graduated and you did it. What was your experience? What was your feelings around that event? Were you really happy, proud?
I feel awful saying this now because I know my graduation will have been so much better than people who've had online graduations. I honestly wasn't that bothered about graduation. I honestly, it's really bad. Like I'd already had my kind of like, oh, you did it, everything's okay moment when I finished my degree. And again, like my health was a factor in this. It'd be like naive to say that it wasn't, but I just didn't like the idea of having to go and sit through the ceremony and also having to do the walk across the stage. Also because I'm a bit vertically challenged at the best of times. Like I never know when my legs are going to give out, and it's me. Like if anyone was going to fall on the stage, it was going to be me. I even I wore heels for graduation and I swapped shoes before I did the walk across the stage because I just did not trust myself. But yeah, no, looking back, it was nice. And it was nice to have like the cap and the gown and, get the picture and do what you're supposed to do. So looking back now, and especially like you said, given the fact that a lot of people haven't or won't have that experience, I do feel very lucky to have had it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like graduation was also quite inaccessible for disabled students. There's a lot of work to be done in that area. So it wasn't like, while it was nice to do it and to have that experience, it wasn't like my ultimate highlight of uni. It wasn't like the I did it moment that we perhaps think it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, to be honest, you graduation happens a lot long after you've actually finished the degree. And so I'd almost think that you kind of just like, you get there and it's nice to see everyone again.
Yeah.
But you've kind of already gone through that emotional catharsis of being like, that's it, I'm in the world. You passed through the other side.
And they like everyone kind of like, there's a whole big thing about how like it's typical to like go to the ceremony with your family and then go out for a nice meal afterwards, whereas the highlight for me was just going in the car on my way home, just calling for a Mackey's, just having a Mackey's with my parents. Like I was in my posh gown and everything, but like just having a cheeky Mackey's, that was the best bit of the whole thing for me.
And you're still doing that to this day, yeah?
Absolutely. Nothing in life that can't be solved with a cheeky Mackey's.
No, just putting on the gown and the hat again, just to order some Mackey's.
I should make that a thing, definitely. When I'm having a low day, just relive it.
Just another Instagram post, why not? Or TikTok or something wild like that. But since graduating, obviously, what would you say that people generally maybe didn't understand about your illness whilst at university? Any sort of interactions that you may have had, or maybe that people still don't understand about it now?
Yeah, ME is, there's still so much work to be done. People think they understand what ME is, but they often have quite a flawed perception of it. Yeah, so the thing with ME is that there is a lot of stigma around the illness, and a lot of people think they understand what the illness is when in fact they have quite a skewed perception of it. And something that's rung true all through my experience at uni and everything that's come afterwards is that people don't realise how much of a spectrum there is within ME as an illness. So somebody least ill or like mildly ill, whilst their life still is significantly affected, they might be able to work full time and have a social life. Whereas people on the very severe end of the spectrum, I have friends who haven't been able to get out of their beds for over 5 years. They're tube fed. Wow. They can't speak. It's almost like a whole other illness while still being the same diagnosis.
Yeah.
So the thing I'm always keen to say when people find out that I was a student and I have ME is that there is so much variability. So there is no way you can look at one person with ME and feel like everybody else with ME has the same experience, because even within the symptoms, it just varies so much. So it's very much a case of like looking at individuals rather than looking at one person and thinking that you magically understand everything about everyone with the illness.
Yeah, it's mad that there can be such a varied experience of the same illness across the board. But you've already slightly touched on this question. But if there's any other points that you've got to make, you're not a spokesperson, obviously, for all people suffering from your illness, but is there any bits of advice that you'd give to people who are suffering from this illness or other illnesses, just in terms of general life, about maybe maintaining a positive mindset or setting achievable goals? What advice would you give, and should they maybe share their story like you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think because people are so different, like I don't think you should necessarily feel obliged to share your story or feel like that's something that you have to do to be valid. But if you find power and comfort in doing that, I can only speak for myself, but like beginning to be more open about my experiences has changed my life for the better. It shaped my career. It's, again, not to sound too stereotypical, but it has shaped who I am as a person. So I think my best advice would be, I mean, I'm still trying to remind myself of this now, but there's very much nobody's path to follow but your own, especially when you're dealing with a chronic illness. So it can be very easy to look at the people around you and compare yourself and think, oh, I'm not doing things like them, so I must be a failure. When at the end of the day, like your life is very much your own. It's all about finding what works for you and your own situation. And it took me years and years to figure that out. And it's something that I still forget now. And then the other thing I would say, again, very much rooted in my own experiences, I know how often it can feel like nobody sees how hard you're trying and how hard you're working. It can feel like nobody actually realizes just how difficult you're finding things and how much you want things to be better. But please hang in there, because even if it's not now, your time is coming, your time will come. So if you're a student, or if you're just like going about your life and you're really struggling, like, it's not naive to think that things can and do get better. And like, my quality of life now is a million miles away from what it once was. So it's not naive to have hope, is what I would say.
Wow, that was awesome. It's like,
oh, thanks.
That's perked me up today. I hope that's perked up people listening, because that's perked me up.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Inspirational speaker. You need to do more video content.
Don't encourage me.
But anyway, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. Whether this is the first podcast you've been on, I'm not sure, but I hope you've enjoyed it. And for people watching on YouTube, there'll be plenty of highlights to hopefully look forward to from this episode. And if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Music, make sure to follow us on those and give us a good rating on Apple Music, because it helps get us up those charts, as it were. But thank you so much, Pippa. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.